Originally from the South, Christopher has published over 21 stories, most recently in Switchback, Gravel, Timber Journal, Quarterly West, and Steel Toe Review. He has won awards, including the 2016 Writers at Work Fellowship Competition. Christopher teaches Level 1 fiction and poetry at the Writers Studio and is a co-founding editor of KGB, a new literary journal. For more information about Christopher, visit ChristopherXShade.com.
Thank you, Andrea. Tonight I'm reading a story called Drive. Can I just pick this up? Reading a story called Drive. This was just published in a magazine called Switchback which is a magazine of the MFA program at the University of San Francisco. It's called Drive. He looked everywhere for her. In his 73 Super Beetle, he drove to her parents' big yellow house on Humboldt Street, jogged up the porch steps, knocked on the door, panted, waited, no answer. At the side of the house around back, where gravel led to the garage, he knocked on the privacy fence gate. The pool's smell was in the air. It was a clean smell, a clear sunlight smell on her wet skin and on her one piece after swimming while she lay in the sun in her tortoise shell sunglasses, behind which he could not see, but he knew somehow that she pretended to have closed eyes when she was in fact regarding him through her lashes still moist with tiny water beads. There was the sound of agitated bees in the air. It was the pool's dragging pump. He drove to her favorite place with trees, not Cheeseman Park as one might guess. That was a neighborhood away. Instead, just north of busy First Avenue, her favorite place with trees was a nameless strip of green where neighborhood residents might walk after a meal. Grass and dandelions and other weeds had been thinned by joggers cutting through, by the rare family picnic blanket, by raucous children, by dogs jumping for thrown tennis balls, and by lovers like him and her, holding hands, leaning with her back against an old oak so that he might kiss her, and then together sliding to sit in the shade on the fat roots and dirt and weeds to plan great and impossible things. She wanted to be a dancer. She thought she might paint. She would be a Lee Krasner in a wintry countryside cottage. She wanted to cure cancer. She was certain it was possible. Anything was possible. It wasn't at all like her father had told her, that she should finish at the university and probably meet someone there, and as a result, everything would get figured out. No, she would figure it out. She would not resign to the fate of a great passage of time. The time was now more urgently than ever. She would race cars. Those cars were cute, and she was petite. She would easily fit inside. Great people were waiting for her. When she arrived, they would know that she belonged. They would see at once that she'd always belonged. He drove to her high school, Cherry Creek High School. He didn't know why. There was no reason he could think of why she would evacuate to such a place. But he was looking everywhere. He slid the Beetle to a halt and rushed the front doors, closed, locked, secure, with a chain and padlock. At the football field, he climbed the fence. Sprinklers in the grass hissed and ticked. He dodged spray as he hastily searched the bleachers everywhere, imagining her there so clearly. A younger her, in oranges and browns and corduroy. But in fact, she was not there. He'd never been with her there. She probably had no fond memories of this place. He climbed back over the fence, hurting his ankle in the jump down on the other side of it, and sped away in the Beetle. At her church, where he went with her on Sunday mornings, sometimes with her mother and father, her church where he'd imagined one day they might be married. He lifted aside the curtain of the vacant confessional, and he looked in the sacristy. He was startled by a scarecrow of vestments. She had told him she would be adored. She would not be mean. She would be a church-going Christian. She would be familiar with the Bible and know more than a few verses that she knew, like Isaiah 40:31, the one about eagles. She would be someone who did not look back. She would be erudite. When she told him this, he had no idea what this word meant, and when he looked it up later, he couldn't find it. He couldn't guess the spelling of the word. She would learn languages. She would travel. She would see France all the way to Cassis. Her grandmother had visited Cassis in 1978, and she had her grandmother's Cassis map that had become delicate over the years of folding and unfolding. She pointed to things on the map. She would sunbathe on the Plage de la Grande Mer. She would dine in the old port on the Quai de Beau. She would visit the old church, Saint-Michel. She would work in the movie industry. Her grandfather had told her so. Her grandfather had said he could tell. He said there was something about the way she stood at a window. Even as young as she was, there was something about the way her eyes did not quite look at the same point in space, though they in fact did, but he said it struck him that hers were movie star eyes. These many years later, she insisted she would be in movies. She would work magic on and off screen. She had said she would be with him. She would always be with him. They would marry even if someone said they shouldn't. But who would say they shouldn't? Who might say she shouldn't marry him? Her father, who had asked him, could he close a deal? Her sensible Aunt Colleen? Her Uncle Mike, who had worked in dust-offs in Vietnam and who'd asked him, what were his plans? What did he want to do really? And why not finish at the university? Why not finish something? She had told him they would make a future for themselves, a future brighter than anyone would expect, something to change the world. That's how important it was for her to be with him. He went to the Park Hill Cafe where they'd gone together in the early days, to their usual outside table, a memory so vivid it seemed like yesterday. He got in front of two women sitting there, his heart pounding so hard he felt it in his head because he was startled by the image of her, but only an image because neither of these were her. That first day here with her, he'd been so flustered, so astonished to be in her presence. He couldn't talk, he couldn't comprehend the menu. She had to order for him. She ordered him a sandwich and an orange soda from overseas. It was clear and it was cold and clean in his mouth and throat. When they were leaving the table, he put so much money down that she widened her eyes at him and then picked it all up, counted it, shaking her head, and then she said it was very kind of him, but was it really necessary? She slid some of the bills across to him. Take it, she said, and when he didn't move, because in the state he was in, he didn't have a grasp of what he'd done. She said, you can't afford to be so kind. He went to the 6th Avenue Cafe where their usual table was inside at a window with a view of the changing leaves or the snow, and he walked, still limping, all through the place, but she was not to be found there. He sat at their table where, one day in particular, they'd had hot tea and held hands across the table, and then she'd asked him why were his hands always so cold. She withdrew her own hand. She told him to put his hands around the teacup like she did, elbows on the table, the cup in both hands, her eyes watching him over the brim. And so he picked up his teacup in both hands and put his elbows on the table and looked at her and asked, now what? Now, she said, come closer in your chair. Now we wrap our legs together under the table. As they did this, he nearly spilled his tea. Careful, she said. Now let's put our arms across. Put your tea on the other side of mine. Don't spill it on me. He said, I haven't yet. She said, there we are. He asked, now what? She said, now we sip the other person's tea. He said, this is elaborate. Are you comfortable? She said, yes, I really am. Are you? He said, we've tied ourselves in a knot. But the knot loosened over time, over days and weeks, in the gradual way that these things do, in moments of odd words and misunderstandings, and then in his shocking, dreadful error of causing a tear in the fold of her grandmother's cassis map. It was his pulling open the map the wrong way that had caused the tear. It made no sound when it tore. He was left with his hands in the air holding nothing. He said he was sorry. He didn't know how it had happened. It had come apart in his hands. But she was so upset she would not respond. He suffered days apart from her and spent countless hours in the car, both hands on the wheel, trying to drive through new and different streets. He asked her out again and set out to entertain her. He made her laugh. He'd known that this would bring her back, and it had, but it hadn't, not really. At last, he turned the Beetle toward home. He returned it to the garage. He pulled the garage door open, drove in, then pulled it down on his way back to the house. On the porch, he knocked the dirt from his boots and went in the house. Just inside, he unlaced his boots, pulled them off, and he stood them on the mud rug, as his wife Nora called it, or the ugly rug, as she sometimes called it, or the washing machine rug, because it could be found there when it was missing from the entryway. But it wasn't missing. Everything was, after all, where it should be. Nora called from the front room, "Where have you been, Maurice?" He said, "I went for a drive." Thank you. Thank you. Before I introduce Iris, I would like just to mention that I'm giving a lecture on writing at the New York Public Library at the Mulberry Street branch in Nolita on March 17th, Saturday, St. Patrick's Day. So that'll be fun. So it's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's called When the Needle is Stuck. And it's all about writing and finding the story that matters to you. So please join me for that. And you can find more about that on our Facebook page and everywhere out in the world. Iris Lee Stoller, a native Brooklynite, writes under the pen name Iris Lee. Her book of poetry, Urban Bird Life, was published in 2010 by NYQ Books. She co-leads a writing workshop for theater professionals at the Actors Fund and has studied the poetry theater connection at HB Studios. Welcome, Iris.
A survey. Do you own your own home, or are you just a renter? Or do you have a roommate? Or do you live with family, even though you're old for this way of living? But, oh, finances preclude your having your own space. One more question. Are you homeless? As in, having less home than every human being ought to have. Perhaps you sleep in your car. But if you have no car, you must sleep in the subway and eat wherever and shit wherever. Thanks for responding to this questionnaire. Dress code. He once said, "Don't wear jeans," before he picked me up and took me to meet his cousins for the first time. And I was so insulted and angry that he could think I didn't know what was proper to wear, that I sulkily muttered, "Of course I wasn't planning to wear jeans." I now realize he didn't want them to think because I was white I would be disrespecting his family. Never occurred to me then, but that's because I was white. Still am. Odyssey. There is a man stationed himself in the subway station down the block from my house, who sits against the wall in the passage of the subway station, smiling at us as we pass by. And stationed there, he smiles for money. When we give him money, he is so nice. That's why we give him money. Those 3 poems are a form called heinaku, which was created by the poet Eileen Tabios. The next two that I'm going to read are a bit different. They're from my book, Urban Bird Life. Visiting my Coney Island home. Carmela used to fuck for money under this boardwalk. Here's the stoop where Francine's boyfriend shot her. When we heard the news, we bathed the girls' room of the Lincoln High School bathroom with our tears. Our mothers leaned calloused elbows on window ledges of houses that once crowded these empty lots, where crazy ladies are sifting for coins. On his rare days off, my roller coaster hero father would hold my hand navigating Steeplechase Park. It's this parking lot with a parachute jump as lawn ornament. They think the mob pushed the Jewish guy out the window of the Half Moon Hotel back in the 40s. When things got bad at home, my mother's sister would check in there and swig whiskey, while my cousins roamed the hallways, waiting for my mother to take them for skee ball and custard. I came along for part of the day. Now the Half Moon's a nursing home, filled with odors of incontinence. Not everything has changed. The Stillwell Avenue subway station still holds its old aromas of piss and cotton candy. Beyond the beach sand, sun-flung diamonds glitter the waves. And mornings, when elsewhere the city revels in sun, fog still whitens the ocean-facing windows, and the old men still tell the weather by the bellboy's toll. And the last poem is also from my book, and I love reading it at places like this, and you'll understand why, I think. It's called My Dead Mother Comes to My Imaginary Poetry Reading. No, please don't sit all the way back there. Yes, you look fine. No one will notice your teeth. I know you're nervous. I can tell by your grim mouth. You're wondering why I insisted you come. I could have described it to you later and given you a copy of the program with my name listed. We could have sat in your kitchen on the aluminum chairs, drinking your good coffee. You would not have asked me to read any poems to you. But you're here. I sent the taxi to bring you to this dark room below the restaurant. There's a bar at the back. I've brought you some coffee, but it's stale and there was no cream. Now listen, I will read 4 poems. Only one may upset you. It's about me. The others are about trees and other people. You won't relax your hold on the cup until I finish reading, and everyone applauds. You'll say, very nice, with a tight smile, and begin to move toward the door. If I were with anyone but you, I'd ask, want to have a drink? But I'll know how badly you want to be home. Tell me, I'll start to say, but I'll find you a cab instead. You'll be home soon. I'll have tipped the driver. I'll be getting high on white wine with other poets. You'll be riding that taxi. I hope you're smiling. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Anamyn Turowski. She's the co-director of the Writers Studio's Hudson branch, and she's currently at work on a novel. Anamyn?
Iris, do we share mothers? Oh my. So this is from the opening of my short story, Threadbare. I hung my spring collection across my rep's glossy showroom wall. The dresses, soldiers in my last battle for solvency, trembled in the breeze. It's a beautiful day, I said while the rep eyed the collection. My hands shook and I couldn't stop perspiring, so I put my head out the window. 5 floors down, plastic bags and styrofoam cups pinwheeled down 9th. A squirrel dodged a car and charged up a telephone pole. I took in a deep breath and coughed. Diesel and hot dogs commingled in the downtown LA air. "It's your best line yet," my rep announced. "Wait till Barney sees this. It's almost like you've got it again. Maybe you're back." Lean and Botox, he dipped a carrot into some low-cal confection as he paced, peering closely at the clothes. His enthusiasm felt like a dangling oxygen mask. Maybe I could give my faithful employees their back wages, pay final notice bills, and buy a bottle of wine that cost more than a tub of cottage cheese. Maybe I'd pay on my second mortgage, maybe my first. Maybe pay down some principal. Maybe I was back. "Your spring collection is lifeless," the buyer from Barney said the next day as she pawed at my paisley print chiffons. I felt the air in the showroom evaporate. I wanted to make a scene, but I don't do that. "I want what you showed me last season, you know, that whole Dr. Zhivago thing, but without the fur and the white shirts, you know, beachy." She passed on Zhivago, too retro, too czarist, too Julie Christie, whoever that is, her assistant had said. "I've been obsessed with Yuri and Laura, all that snow and loneliness and revolution." Their persistent loneliness felt reassuring. I'd poured my soul into a wraparound blouse with just the tiniest hint of snowflake lace. I wasn't back. A week after Barney's passed, I closed my business, had a sale, and the competition swept in like the Bolsheviks. They filched my best pattern maker, took the cutting tables, and presumed I wouldn't mind throwing in the pattern paper. Why not? What was I going to do with it? Construct a homeless shelter? Designs I'd used for years were tossed in the dumpster. Employees I'd worried the most about found jobs within hours. As I drove away from my office for the last time, in the rearview mirror, hope and possibility waved goodbye. I bit my lip till I had to pull over and put my head on the steering wheel. A policeman tapped my window and told me to move on. I declared bankruptcy 2 days later. It was easier than I imagined, easier than divorce. I imagined the judge bludgeoning me with questions. "Are you now, or have you ever been talented?" Or, "Can you explain for the courtroom why you let it get so bad?" Or, "How and why did you hang on so long?" But the judge never looked at or spoke to me, and it was done. Without an office to go to, I spent hours at home watching the Gardening Network. I looked online for jobs in my field. Wanted, experienced pattern cutter. I could cut rings around anyone. They said I was overqualified. The voice in my head chanted, "Go back to New York." It hurt to think about. Obviously, I no longer knew how to be on trend, and apparently my forecasting sucked. But what was I going to do? Wanted, reliable sales representative. Reliable I am. Just ask my ex-husband. He relied on me to work late, travel on weekends. 2 years ago, he phoned from Walla Walla, where he was on location filming, to say our marriage was a wreck and he had to get out. I wanted to march over and show him how good we were. I wanted to sew him a suit out of trash bags and suffocate him. I wanted him back. I still do. 4 months since the judge had stamped my bankruptcy papers, I was still looking for a job. My friend Marla, a lawyer for one of the studios, suggested temp work at Warner Brothers. The HR manager laughed. "You're way overqualified." Her face added, "Too old." "They're so unimaginative," Marla sighed as she sucked down her second gin martini. We were settled into a booth at the gloomy steakhouse across the street from Warner's in Burbank. The restaurant had been built in the 40s when everyone smoked. It hadn't been updated, so the wallpaper and the carpet, it still smelled of those days, and the leather upholstery was cracked, and the coils in the seats dug in if you sat too long. The bartender said Marilyn ate BLTs in the back booth when she shot at Warner's. Her dingy autographed headshot still hung there, along with Brando's and Bogart's, and my favorite, Lloyd Bridges in a scuba outfit. I liked his snorkel. I'm going to get a job here, I said. I decided this because I was working on my third glass of their house red, and there was something cozy about the place. I felt like I'd landed in film noir without the intrigue and danger. The place was exotic in a chop suey sort of a way. Are you drunk? Asked Marla. Thank you. It's my honor to bring our next reader, Rachael Nevins, who is a Brooklyn-based freelance writer and editor whose poetry, essays, and book reviews have appeared in Rattle, Literary Mama, Hazlitt, Publishers Weekly, and elsewhere. She's a student in the master class and teaches online advanced poetry with the Writer's Studio.
Hi. So, thank you, Anamyn. That was funny. This is, I'm working on a diary-like thing. The narrative is ongoing, and I just want to say I'm okay. All right, this is a prologue. She had a good life, said my grandmother in the days after my mother died, and for some time I found some comfort in the idea, although I questioned whether 48 years and a house and family in the suburbs had been enough for her. It would not have been enough for me. Her restlessness is in my bones. It is my restlessness now. Fearing the bomb. This is 10/11/17. We have survived another day, I tell my friend before she hugs me and turns away. I can't stop thinking about how we all might die and soon, and I can't stop measuring my life against my mother's, who died at the age of 48, 22 years, 4 days ago, when I was 22 years old. What am I doing with my days? This evening I brought nothing to my writing workshop, and this morning stood at the door to our apartment, yelling at the child looking for his misplaced baseball cap. Today in the dark, 10/16/17. Is this how the dying live, reassuring themselves in the morning that they've survived another night, and again in the evening that they've seen another day? I arose today in the dark so that I could meditate and write. My older son woke early, too, and brought his book into my room, wanting my company in the stillness before dawn. This is what I live for, this quiet, the scritch-scratch of my pen, the shush as my son turns another page. The day after Thanksgiving, 11/24/17. 1 month ago, I felt certain that we were going to die, all of us together in a great conflagration, and soon. And now it is only my grandmother who is dying, alone in her bed. I want to be Rose, her nurse, to be the one to soothe my grandmother's cracked lips with lotion, and to admonish her, to take some sips of water, and to open her eyes, so that she can look at her granddaughters one more time. We want her to stay, but she wants to go away, somewhere, I don't know, says Rose. I sit on the floor with my sister, and together we hold my grandmother's hand until she nods her head to say, it's time now, she wants to be alone. Diagnostic mammogram. 12/20/17. You are asked to twist your torso and limbs and embrace the machine. And then you are told to stop breathing as it crushes the most tender part of your body. Afterward, the technician takes you to a small dark room with many monitors, where the radiologist points to a scattered constellation of calcifications in one image, and tells you that the meaning of these specks is ambiguous and a biopsy is recommended. She says that most likely no cancer will be found, and you are about to start crying because you saw when you were young how very fast it all went for your mother. And when the radiologist suggests that your mother's cancer was found too late, you say, no, she went from stage 2 to dead in 18 months. And you see no reason to expect any better for yourself. The evening before the biopsy, 1/9/18. The sun was long gone before I set foot outdoors today, just to go 6 blocks to get the kids from after school and 6 blocks home again. The younger boy ate hardly any of his dinner, so I told him he could have no cookies. And he cried himself to sleep, wanting cookies. How could I console him? All he wanted was for me to change my mind. While waiting for my husband to return home, I listened to Song Exploder and played solitaire, shuffling the cards and putting them in order, indifferent to the outcome. But with each game I lost, I became more agitated, wanting only to live. To introduce Joel Hinman. Teaches fiction, poetry, and memoir at the Writer's Studio. Until recently, he was an editor at Epiphany magazine. His short fiction has appeared in Fiction Now, the Brooklyn Review, and Epiphany, and is forthcoming in the North Atlantic Review.
Thank you. Great to hear Christopher and Iris, whose work I didn't know, and Rachael and Anamyn. Done this before, but it's always intimidating following that much clarity and power. So really well done. Also, thanks to Andrea for organizing this. And I hear you. So I have been writing a novella since the late 1600s, and I was going to bring it in here so you can admire the changes in punctuation in the last decade. And then I said, fuck it, let's do something fun and fresh. Well, maybe not fun. This is the beginning of a short story I'm calling Sundowning. Stepping off the curb, crossing Fifth Avenue, I was hit in the head by a truck mirror. I had been peripherally aware that upstream from me a taxi had caused the van to veer out of its lane, but still the blow came as a surprise. Because the mirror extended away from the vehicle, I managed somehow to roll along the side of the van. Of course, I staggered a bit, but then I remained on my feet and was able to continue across Fifth Avenue. But midway there, the taxi that had caused the collision in the first place pulled up, and the driver practically ordered me to sue the van driver. For some reason, this infuriated me, and I sternly warned the taxi driver to never tell me what to do. But as I continued across the avenue, I found myself suddenly preoccupied with a long-ago family memory. The story told repeatedly by my mother and my uncle was about a great-uncle, or it may have been a great-great-uncle, who was killed after being struck by a truck mirror in Indianapolis, Indiana. The story seemed to have almost a mythic or folkloric significance. Now, it turns out that my mother and father had died of cancer and a heart attack, respectively. That and alcohol was what I worried about, but here was a susceptibility I had never imagined. Could it be that there was some kind of genetic predisposition to being struck down in traffic? If so, I would need to be more vigilant instead of carelessly stepping off the curb whenever I felt like it, as was my habit. I was thinking these thoughts when I reached the sidewalk on the east side of Fifth Avenue, where the van driver caught up with me. He was in a state, clearly beside himself with worry. He reached for my arm, looking up into my face solicitously, asking if I was okay. I shook off his hand, and by way of assuaging his concern, coolly remarked that my great-uncle had been killed by a truck mirror. And since I couldn't think of anything else that needed to be said, I turned away and went north along Fifth Avenue, and I never saw the van driver again. That afternoon, I'd gone to the movie theater to purchase tickets for my girlfriend and I for a later show. I don't remember what I did in the hours before the film, nor what the movie was about. As I sat in the darkened movie theater, I began to realize that I was no longer certain who I was. Nor did I recognize my girlfriend. In fact, I happened to be seated between two women, both of a similar age. I took advantage of the darkness in the cinema to study them, trying to figure out who I arrived with. I could not make a positive identification. There was, however, a scene in the movie that made a deep impression. A woman attired in what I would describe as Turkish clothing stood on a high terrace looking out over some very steep mountains while eating sherbet from a tiny silver bowl. The film ended and everybody stood up. I waited to see what would happen, not wishing to do anything that would betray my uncertainty. The girl to my left put her hand on my arm and I asked how I liked the movie. I was non-committal. I wondered what would happen next, and if we went back to her place, would I would be expected to know what to do. It was an old movie theater, and it took a while for us to file out. In my hospice work, I've often noticed how patients with impaired memories will cunningly maintain a kind of tactical silence, hoping you'll step in with clues that will aid their recollection. I adapted this strategy, and it seemed to work. Maybe my diffidence or my passivity created a vacuum which prompted my companion to recount the story of how we met. Of course, I pretended to know the story. Apparently, I had gone to a film about some women who intended to escape the poverty of their native lands by becoming drug mules, swallowing large bags of cocaine that they then defecate when they arrive in the United States. Unfortunately for one, the ingested bag ruptures in her stomach and she goes into convulsions. The scene, with its alternating close-ups of the stricken woman and her friends who could not reveal themselves, was harrowing. And in the middle of it, a woman in the first row of the movie theater stood up and promptly fainted. Immediately, a number of us went to help. We picked her up and carried her into the lobby where she laid on the carpet while somebody went to get the unfortunate woman some water. Eventually, she came around and the other people who helped rescue her indicated that they wanted to return to the movie. Relieved, because I also found the scene upsetting, I said I would remain. When she was sufficiently recovered, we left the theater to go to get a cup of tea. Do you remember where we went, that place near Tompkins Square Park? Not really, I said. We were emerging from the movie theater. Do you ever see that woman anymore? She asked. Who? I inquired. The woman you'd gone to the film with. No, I said, we drifted apart. Now I have you all to myself. Outside the movie theater, I waited to see what would come next and careful to let her lead us where we were expected to go. It so happened that we were standing roughly in the same spot where I'd been struck only a few hours ago. And I thought of telling her, but worried that I might have already and that she might come to some unwanted conclusions. We went to her place, which was on East 66, and had a light supper and made love. Afterwards, she told me I'd been unusually tender. She asked me if I was going to spend the night, and I told her I would. On the one hand, I was pleased with her report, but on the other hand, I felt as if I'd given away information without being aware I had done so. The metamorphosis that I was in the middle of had not completely run its course, and I seemed to lack some essential element of self-possession. I had to be patient. As soon as she was asleep, I retrieved my wallet and went into the bathroom to look at my address. It seemed unfamiliar. There were some other things, credit cards, a few receipts, the usual, but nothing that provided any substantive clue as to who I had been. There was nothing left to be done, so I went back and lay next to her, waiting until dawn when I could make my escape. In the morning, I made my excuses, telling her that of course I hadn't forgotten our plans for that evening, though in truth I had no idea if we'd made plans. She kissed me, remarking on how forgetful I had become. I decided to stay home from work that day. There were diaries there in the apartment. I read them with great ambivalence. Whoever he was, he seemed to live shadowed by remorse over something he could not name. Much of what he had to say was tiresome and a cliche. The next day, feeling better, I returned to work. Everything seemed relatively normal, so I decided after work to visit a cafe I frequented a few blocks west of the hospice. The cafe had a large front room with a steam table and many chairs and tables arranged in open seating, but if you ducked behind the red curtain, you found yourself in a smaller cafe in the back where you could read and write in your journal. But to get to the cafe, you had to pass the high school, where the students often gathered on the sidewalk in the afternoon. Many of them were black or Hispanic, and they liked to play fight. Occasionally, without meaning to, they would knock into people passing by, and a few times I'd landed in the gutter. So it was my habit to duck behind the phone booth, which is how I came to spot Tracy without her seeing me. She was coming along 31st Street with her arm around a man I had never seen before. This was shocking, since I count Tracy and Saul as among my closest friends. Rarely does a week go by when we don't have dinner, and here she was on the arm of another man in a distant part of town. And from the body language, it was obvious they were intimate. After they'd gone, I stumbled along 31st Street in a daze before deciding what I had to do. Saul was home and buzzed me up. He was glad to see me until he saw my face. "Oh my God, what's wrong?" he cried. I managed only to get out Tracy's name when he rushed at me. "Tell me she's okay," his voice pleading. "She is," I said, after a fact. His whole expression changed and he became wary and suspicious. "I'm sorry, Saul, I don't want to do this, but I saw Tracy with another man." He looked like a man who'd been struck and fell back against the bookshelf. "This can't be," he said, but the damage was done. "You have to be mistaken." "I'm not," I assured him, and I told him the story of what I'd seen. "She told me she was seeing Claudia." I shrugged. I didn't want to get into he said, she said. It was none of my business. I already regretted what I'd done, although I rationalized Saul would have done the same for me. He went for his cell phone. When he returned, he was angry. He punched in numbers and waited. "Claudia, never mind, just listen. Were you with Tracy this afternoon?" I watched his face as he listened, and if anything, he began to look more and more confused. "Thanks," he said, cutting the call. Now he was glaring at me. "She was with Claudia." Of course she would say that if she was... He cut me off. "Why are you doing this?" "Saul, I didn't want to." "You fucking asshole." Behind, we heard the door opening. It was Claudia, and she must have heard part of what Saul said because she looked utterly bewildered. Before she could say anything, Saul demanded to know where she had been. "Why?" she asked, kind of strange smile on her face. Now he was shouting, "Just tell me where you've been." While she did not like being spoken to in this tone of voice, she responded quite calmly that she'd had lunch with Claudia. "Now, would you mind?" Saul cut her off. He says, pointing at me, that he saw you with another man. Her eyes swung towards me in a rather angry look. And rather than look angry, she actually appeared curious. "Why would you say that?" she asked mildly. "Who cares why he said that? He comes in here trying to destroy our relationship. Get out, get the fuck out, or I swear..." I don't know what the actual threat was because he literally chased me out the door. I will never forget that moment, though. I can still see the hallway clearly, Persian runner underfoot, the wall sconce, his paisley shirt untucked on one side, the look of wild despair on Saul's face when he decided I had betrayed him, or them. That night, I walked for hours trying to forget. There is a bench I like in a small plaza outside the 72nd Street subway station. I stopped there to think things through. Something was nagging me. I had begun to doubt whether the Tracy I had seen on 31st Street was wearing the same jacket as the Tracy who walked into the apartment later. This was troublesome because Saul's untucked shirt suggested that he had spent the afternoon in uninterrupted solitude. Around midnight, I found myself in front of the hospice. I wasn't scheduled to work, but sometimes I dropped by there at odd hours just for companionship. There was a particular woman I wanted to visit. Recently, she'd recovered some of her memory, a sign the staff and I interpreted as meaning she'd reached the end of her time.